guy with the suit, so it must just set me apart to be the speaker for the evening. But it really is humbling to just to see you guys come out. The amount of energy that goes into the thought of a political campaign is quite shocking, to be honest. And when you ask for your friends to come and support you and get behind you and think about you and talk about you for 6 to 11 months, depending on how the rest of this campaign plays out, it's a bit of a stretch for someone who's really just gone at it and pushed my way through a lot of stuff in my life. But what I do know about this campaign is I cannot get here or anywhere else by myself. I actually need people to come alongside of me, support me, and tell their friends, tell their family, even talk to people they may not know, for me to get the exposure and support that I need from the community to be your sheriff. The opportunity that I have tonight is just the beginning of so many more chances that I'm going to have to be in front of our community through debates. You know, we put this out, and for the most part, I recognize the faces that are in this room. This is a safe room. You can introduce yourselves to each other afterwards and get to know one another. But I know that I'm going to face some times in this campaign that are going to stretch me. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be tense. And there's even been a few times just since it began that it's been that way. So before I get too cranked up, I need to acknowledge my wife, Natalie White, who is the only person so far in this campaign that has had exclusive veto authority who could have stopped this thing before it started. And not only did she not push the veto button, but she has come alongside of me. She's done her research. She has no idea what she's in for, but she is a courageous, powerful woman who would be an excellent first lady to the sheriff for the community, but more importantly than that, for my friends, my family, and myself. She has an excellent support. She said yes to eloping to a waterfall to get married. That's what you see in the background. So thank you to her. And she set this up. I mean, I did some work. I don't know how much, but she's been on this for a long time. So thank you. Can we give her a hand?
Thanks.
You know, I would clap, but I dropped the microphone when I was unpacking and it broke a wire inside, so I had to rewire it right before you all got here. Some of you were here for part of that. So I have to be careful this whole evening so I don't screw this up, which is a great testimony and a kickoff to this campaign because it's just how things go sometimes. With over 20 years of public safety so far, it seems to be the way that it goes. We improvise and overcome. I'm glad that I've conquered another challenge tonight. But objectives, why did I invite you guys to a launch? You know, this is almost like wondering who would show up at your funeral, but if it's your funeral, you're not there to see anyway, so you don't care. But for this, to launch this thing out and say, please come and hear what I have to say, hear what I have to share, and hopefully you'll be inspired when you leave here enough to talk about it, enough to maybe host an event, get people to the next one, something. But most of all, I do want to build relationship at this level with people. You could say, well, we've known you for your whole life almost, or your whole life for sure, because there's people in the room that have known me for years or forever, and that's great. But I also want you to get to know each other. And that what starts here can spread so much further than the campaign, because this campaign is going to hopefully be over in June, possibly November. But that's just the beginning. I know we'll face challenges and struggles ahead, and I want us to have a strong network and a strong community. it's going to take momentum to get where we're going. Momentum in my household, there's folks in here, you know that you're in the cheering section. You've been in the cheering section since I announced this to you long before it became public, who reminded me of my character and my values along the way when I thought, man, am I crazy to think that this is a good idea? There's a lot easier ways to change the world or make a living than a political campaign. But I've been preparing for this my entire life. And I appreciate this opportunity to share the vision that I've had for my life since the very beginning. Now, I have an opportunity to share that on a much larger level. Before, when I thought of politics and campaigning, I thought, wow, you buy a job. You spend your own money, a lot of it, and you work really hard to get a job. That was the Jordan that was around 15 to 20 years ago. And when I realized that, I turned around once and found myself as a host of a radio show, just urgently trying to connect people in our community with hope, with a compelling future, with a vision, with each other, with a mentor, with a coach. And I realized, I guess this is politics, and I would spend every dime I had if it meant that people in our community had the opportunity to achieve their dreams like I have had mine. So it comes down to connection. That's why we're here. That's why we're going to do an awful lot moving forward. Because our culture's changed. We've had divisions. We've seen things pull apart. We've begun to live a life on social media in many regards and think that we're in relationship, which we do know about each other, but it's not true connection. True connection looks a lot different. We're going to talk about that more as we go on. But sometimes there's never a perfect time to do anything. But I've spent my whole life, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, doing what I can with what I have where I am. And that is what builds momentum. That's what has brought people in behind me so far in my life. And I know that that's going to take us further. So, why me, why now? I've had the opportunity to have up to 400 people underneath me as an employer in picking supervisors, promoting supervisors, hiring new employees. And one of the first questions I always ask, and I'm sure that some of you do too, and you're in that position, is why? Why do you want to work with this team? Why do you want to work for me? In this case, I am interviewing myself for the sake of our community and for the sake of all of you to explain, because while some of you have known me my entire life, some of you have just met me tonight, you have to ask the question, where has he been, what's he been doing, and is it really preparing him? Is he in the mental and physical and emotional state to be leading a county of 100,000 people into the future, regardless of what we face as the chief law enforcement officer of the county? So every experience is an investment, and I have had a whopper of a life of them. We're going to visit a little bit more about that, but with the opportunity to learn, there's 3 types of information in the world that I care about, and I think you all do too. What you know, what you don't know, and what you don't know that you don't know. And for many of us, we've elected to not explore information we didn't know because we just didn't need it. But how many times have we made it a long ways in our lives before we found out stuff we didn't even know that we didn't know? And it would have changed everything if we had. You're going to look at my resume if you haven't. You're going to look at the jobs and the different responsibilities that I've had and think that perhaps I have attention deficit disorder or I'm just an overachiever. But what I've done in that process is try to pull as much information from the I didn't know that I didn't know a category and put it on the table to see, is it within my personality, within my character traits, that's something I can do something with? Is it something I can pass on to an employee or someone that's working below me? or working in a whole different organization, but if they knew it, it would make their job easier. That has been what I've been garnering from each experience. But when we get that investment into ourselves, we must do something with it. I guess we must do anything with it. But for me, I must. And I know that for me to achieve the outcomes that I hope to achieve in my life, to change the lives that I want to change in my life, that I will cash in those investments. I won't just bury them in the sand and wait for the possibility someday that I'll need them. I actually want to see them grow, and I want to see someone else benefit from them. When I say I've lived a lifetime of service, you could say, what were you doing when you were 2? I don't remember. But when I say a lifetime of service, I don't mean that I was the one that was doing the service. What I mean when I say that is through every experience that I've had, and we'll go through those kind of superficially because it could be a long night if we don't. I've either been receiving or sharing my own service from the time as long as I can remember. And there's some lapses in there. But for the most part, it's been quite a ride. Some of you have been here for most of it. Why now is a great question. One of the first questions people ask me, and those who have known me for the last 5 years, is why in the world did you ever leave Two Bear? Did you get fired? So I'm going to address that now. No, I didn't get fired. I had a great plan when I started that job, and it was a tremendous opportunity, and I worked hard while I was there. And it cost me dearly, and most of you in this room, it cost dearly as well, because you haven't seen me in a long time. My friends and my family didn't get much Jordan time in the last 5 or 6 years, because I was in a lifestyle where I had amazing opportunities, and I worked 7 days a week, and a lot of hours in those days, doing some really amazing things. And when all was said and done, and we had the opportunity to see Two Bear Air become a foundation and reach the dream that Mike and I had created when we first envisioned that together, we looked at everything else that was going on in the business world, and I knew I wasn't fulfilled. I was busy, but I knew that the path that I was on, running business, being in the environment that I was in, which was a great opportunities even to come, it wasn't meeting my best self value chart that I had set up for myself. So I made the tough choice. Literally 2 weeks after negotiating a new structure, what my employment would look like, and thinking this is actually going to be pretty easy. I knew that I couldn't coast that way. I wasn't designed to be easy. All of you who've invested in my life did not make investments in my life for me to take it easy. And I sent a message to Mike, and subsequently I resigned, and we came up with a separation plan that took many months, because there was a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And I took my bride to Summers, and we built a home all summer in preparation for this race, for tonight, for this beginning. I didn't want to just jump from one thing to another. For me to take on the challenge and know that I could stand in front of you and an entire community of people, I knew that I needed to have a clear heart, a clear mind, and a clear vision of what I was going to be doing with my life to put myself in that position. So I left a lot behind. I left a lot behind in relationships. Most of you in here know, and a lot of people who haven't met me yet don't know, that I was divorced. In that lifestyle, I did bankrupt a lot of relationships, and a marriage was one of them. And I have spent an awful lot of time fixing and coming up with a plan for how my life would look differently based on the things that I learned. And that's why I wouldn't be up here tonight if my bride, Natalie White, was not endorsing this campaign wholeheartedly and willing to embrace it and be along with me for the whole ride, because there's a few things that you just don't do again. And those are on the top of the list. Relationships are one of the few things that we must hold dear. So my goal next is to introduce you to the fiercest competition that I've faced in my entire life and that I will face in this race and I will face as your sheriff. I have a lot of people come up to me and say, this is a really crowded race. I had an interview today with the Daily Interlake, and that came up again. This is a really crowded race. What do you think? How are you better than the other candidates? I don't want to talk about how I'm better than the other candidates. There's two ways politics go from my experience. I either campaign on the results that I produced in my life, and based on the promise that I can produce those again, maybe bigger, maybe different, but I must produce results in my contract with each one of you and everyone I haven't met yet. Or I could attack my opponents. I could call them opponents. And that's not me. This is one of the most unique races that I can ever imagine, because the other men in this race are good men. And they're men that I've worked with. I've promoted each one of them when I was their boss as the undersheriff. I've shared my personal life with them. I've shared my professional life with them. And I will just leave that as they're good men. And that little guy is the guy I've been competing with for my entire life. And when I decide to take it easy, he's the one who kicks me in the butt and holds me accountable and makes me get back on a path to where I say I want to go with my life. So, how did I get here? From him. I have a few childhood events that I picked out. You might think, wow, why did he choose those as to be campaign issues that he's going to talk about? None of us have had it easy. We've all faced challenges in our life. Mine started pretty early, before I even knew what was going on. I've learned a lot about childhood development through my own experiences in personal development. And I've learned a lot since then, but we have a lot of folks go through divorces, homes that break up. They face a lot of challenges. And every time we face a challenge, we get to pick a direction that's going to take our lives. We get to make it a positive, or we can pick a meaning that's going to detract value from our lives. And for me, the opportunities that I had because of my parents divorcing was my first opportunity to see people love because they wanted to. Some people have two parents, some people have one parent, some people have four parents. I've been richly blessed, and I have learned things and had experiences that I would never have had, and I have empathy for people who are facing struggles and challenges relationally in their life that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had this experience myself. I didn't necessarily need to know how difficult it was to go through that myself, but I have. And that's increased my empathy and understanding. I was hit by a car when I was 7 years old. Not a real big thing in most cases. It was all my fault. I was riding with a loose chain and the chain came off. I swerved in front of a truck. That poor guy, I know it's been a long time. Been 33 years ago, and he wasn't young then. So I doubt I could have gotten a hold of him to tell him today what it meant to me, how it changed this community for him to hit me that day. I wish that I would have known in time to tell him, because I'm sure that haunted him for most of his life. But the reality of the situation is that moment, and many of the moments that came after that, I can trace back to that experience, that moment in my life where things changed a lot. It didn't end there. We went through a house fire right after I turned 11 in February, when the temperatures were something like 15 below zero or 20 below zero or something. All I know, it was below zero. And as the firefighters fought that fire all night long, and the driveway and everything around the house turned into a skating rink, and we watched a fireman fall off the roof and injure his back, and I still see him today. I had an opportunity then to see a different type of life and to see a whole different experience when your worldly possessions as an 11-year-old go up in smoke. It's a traumatic experience, and it has a lasting impact. And I picked one more that I decided I would talk about tonight. And that is that I was homeschooled from the 4th grade through high school. I used to be ashamed of that. I would wonder, how did I ever compete socially when I was raised by my dog? You know, we lived in a pretty remote place for many of those years, and I had an older brother who was my classmate and my best friend, but we were in different grades. I had a lot to learn, and it wasn't through the conventional senses when you learn at home. When you can imagine what it's like, and I've met many homeschool people since then who were taught everything they needed to know by either their mother or a friend or someone else. It was an accredited curriculum. It's not like it was that bootleg, but the exposure taught me things that I've used ever since. The discipline of being homeschooled, because I've also seen homeschool turn out a couple different ways. People that want to get away with not working hard don't have to work hard. People who do want to work hard, and that was my case, I wanted to be inside when there was snow on the ground and outside when there wasn't. So I worked hard to make sure that my schoolwork was done and it measured up. Now, I didn't really have anything to measure myself against other than it was an accredited program, so we did have achievement tests, but I wouldn't know that I actually received a pretty amazing education until I was at the Montana Law Enforcement Academy in the Montana Highway Patrol Basic, and it received, surprisingly, the Academic Achievement Award in my class. I wasn't the only one surprised, pretty much everyone was, because I was the only one that didn't expect to have a shot at it. But the reality is I learned things through that process about teaching myself. People say, how did you ever learn to do all the things that you learned to do? And the reality is I have a passion for teaching myself now because of that experience. And surprisingly, I've hired some homeschool kids that have produced some amazing work in their lives. But you're going to hear me talk about the heart of the community. It's of all the questions I get, Natalie helped me because I was explaining what my vision and what my contract with the community would be if I was elected, of how I saw myself being differently. And she helped me put it into the right words, which is connecting the needs of our people to the heart of our community. And I know when people hear that, you each apply your own meaning to what the heart of the community is for each of you. For me, I can point to so many people and so many experiences in which I've seen the heart of this community shine in the most obscure ways. But I did want to share one story with you, because when it's all said and done, and I look back at all the mentors and all the people in my life who went out of their way to make sure that I was me, but it wasn't just unique to me, it was just who they were. One person has been that way from the very beginning. It was actually the only person that I specifically called on the phone and said, would you please come tonight? And that was my substitute teacher in the 2nd grade, Eda Taylor. She's here tonight. And if this is the only thing that I get to do in this campaign, it will be enough. and that is to honor each person. I wish I could do it individually, but in this case, honor Ida for the fact that when she was the substitute teacher in the 2nd grade, I don't know exactly when her life went the way it went, but at some time in there I knew she was a single mom, and she would leave her pager on the desk when she would teach us school, and occasionally the pager would go off. It was the most exciting part of our day as a second grader. I think it was the 2nd grade. I did 2nd grade twice. It was the best 2 years of my life. And that set a hook. I know she was just interested at the time of probably knowing what went on when she couldn't go on a call. But when I was hit by that car at 7 years old, I don't remember being hit by the car. I don't remember skidding down the road on my face. But what I do remember is being strapped onto a backboard and looking up and seeing Ida's face. And I knew everything was going to be okay. I got carried to the helicopter. I got put inside. I remember a few images from the helicopter and from the hospital afterwards. But like I said, the 2nd grade was the best 2 years of my life. I had a concussion that lasted a year. I couldn't remember what I'd learned the year before, so I went through the 2nd grade again and came out pretty successfully from that, and didn't have much reason to see Ida again until our house burnt down, and we were huddled in the yard trying to stay warm, and she was with the ambulance that night and brought out warm blankets that we cuddled up in while we watched our house burn down until we could get over to the neighbor's place. I would go on with my life. I would go on to lots of things because my ambitious life took me a lot of different directions. But at 18 years old, I had an overwhelming desire to do only one thing with my life, and that was become an EMT and a firefighter and serve my community. I had moved back to Big Fork just for that purpose. I thought I would become a horse wrangler back at the Flathead Lake Lodge, but they didn't want to pay me enough, so I ended up being a cruise boat captain for them instead. But I signed up for Big Fork Ambulance, and Ida was my mentor. She was my teacher. And when I became an EMT, we were on the same call shift together. And she was with me the first time that someone died, the first time I did CPR. And when I think of the heart of the community, I can't think of one story that I could tell you tonight that would really capture what I see and what I feel when I say the heart of our community. And she's just one of many. Since that time, she just set me on a path where I knew that was setting a stage for my life that I wanted to follow. And when I got on that trail and I met more people, I met people like Doug Smith, who was the very beginning of the Big Fork Ambulance. They've since retired. You know, I didn't believe that day would ever happen. We actually would joke that the two of them would never leave the Big Fork Ambulance. But what I have found is when people fall in love, they learn to live. And they both are living vibrant lives today. And after 30 or 50 years or whatever it was of service to the community as volunteer paramedics, they passed the torch on and they're living their lives. And I have often thought, what do I want my life to turn out like? And I hope that I finish as strong as them. So thank you guys for being here tonight. You are true heroes. You're heroes of mine. And I say that for thousands of people who just don't have this opportunity. So thank you. Yes, indeed. So you could say I was misguided, or I just saw opportunities come, because when I started in my professional career, it was things like building log houses for the Amish when I was 14 years old for the summer.
I did that for with the Amish for 1 year, then I did normal construction for another year. But I thought if I was going to drive a car, I should be a mechanic, so I worked for the Chevy garage in Eureka for one summer. Then I went to Glacier Park and was a horse wrangler for a couple years. Had the opportunity to become the barn manager my second year. And I remember my most memorable part of that was my boss saying, "Now remember, if anyone from the park comes, you're 18. I'm not supposed to hire anybody that's not 18. I wish Paul were here tonight. But it was the first chance that I had seen someone see the potential in me to say, yeah, you should be, of all the people here, you should be the one in charge of 6 wranglers and 54 horses and hundreds of people that are going to come for their summer experience from all around the world. I didn't even know what I was getting into at that time. I just said yes. So I became the barn manager, and like I said, I had my first opportunity to see, I had my first broken bone there, trying to break a wild Mustang to ride. I didn't say I always did smart things, but we had an amazing relationship. So we parted ways from the park when I knew I needed to be in Big Fork to pursue my next future. I did one other thing though, because I did need to make the full loop on this homeschool thing, and I really was curious about what I'd missed. I did take a job one winter driving school bus, and it was awesome. And that was what solidified my confidence that I'd made the right choice to stay in homeschool and not push myself over that edge. But things happen when we're looking for our purpose. There are people in this room who still for sure can't say that they have found theirs. And for those of you who are in that position, all I can say is don't give up. Because when you're aligned in your passion and your purpose, you will come to life in a way that you never imagined. And that's what I can say for myself. It's the first time that I was in a burning building with another firefighter who ran out of air, and we had a flashover. Double wides burn really fast. It's just the way it is. But I learned a lot as a volunteer firefighter, and I am still passionate for that kind of work because it's hard work. There is nothing like putting on that much gear and a mask and running into a burning building with your neighbors, because that's what a volunteer fire department is. It's your neighbors. If you want to get to know someone really cool in your community, just join the fire department. You will meet all kinds of different people, but you get to have an amazing experience with some of them. My opportunities there grew because I was anxious to learn. I would take the manuals home and read them at night, just waiting for the next call. And that led me down the path of becoming the assistant chief, and finally the chief said, you know what, you're doing a great job, I'm out. And I continued to do that until I found my next passion, which I couldn't do it all, so I had to give up part of my fire business. But I learned the most I ever learned about people as an EMT. Not only the patients that I served, but the people that I served with. The tireless commitment to see someone healed, to see someone fixed, to see someone's life put back together. And we don't do much of that in the field, but we get them to the place where they can. And that's something that we don't see modeled much in law enforcement. People ask about what's it like at the sheriff's office? And I'd say, well, it's an awful lot like the medical industry, because a lot of us understand medicine a lot more than we understand law enforcement. Except the difference is in the medical industry, we have a hospital on the hill that has 4,000 people working there. The sheriff's office has shifts of 7 people on the street that take them to a very overcrowded jail, to a very burdened justice system, to an overcrowded prison, and we do the best we can to get people rehabilitated and back into life, into their families. But when I think of what's possible in the criminal justice system, I look at what we've achieved in the medical industry, where people work together, they lock arms, and they make stuff happen. And it starts with people who get out of bed in the middle of the night, get in an ambulance, freeze their butts off, and if the driveway isn't plowed, we'll drag them down from the house in a sled, because that's how they get to the hospital. It doesn't matter if that's not the normal way they go. It's just the way it is. And in '96, I remember we couldn't even get up driveways with a snowplow. So we literally would just carry patients down to the road from their house. And some of those driveways were a long ways. But that's how you do it in EMS, and that's how we do it in law enforcement. But I learned what's possible when people just compassionately will give of themselves in that capacity. I guess I was well on the road to seeing myself as a retired paramedic by now. You know, I could have almost, maybe. But in that path, I had one opportunity to go to Polson Ambulance one winter and work while I was running the cruise boat. And we worked 3 days. I would go down and just work back-to-back shifts and live in the station while I was in Polson. And we went 3 days without a call. There are only so many times that someone like me can inventory the ambulance, can wash the ambulance, can cook gourmet food, can watch TV over 5 12-hour shifts without a call, that I wasn't going stir crazy. Meanwhile, the cops were out there day in and day out hustling it. And if they thought they were going to have a free moment to themselves, they would park on the corner and pull people over. They didn't have to write them a ticket. They could just introduce themselves and say hello. I thought, what an amazing job. You have an endless number of people to talk to. You can actually go to the gas station and you can get credit for that because you did a welfare check or a community check or some other check on something where you got to get out of the car, stretch your legs, and embrace the community. So as I watched the men and women in blue, brown, and green, I knew that I was hooked. And I always tell people, this may be a little too abrupt, but I said I was raised to love God, guns, and freedom. I'm like, you know what? Cops get to carry guns too. That's pretty cool. So I joined on my 21st birthday. John Christian was the patrol commander, great guy, and I drove him absolutely crazy because I wanted to join when I was 20. And he said, we just won't let it happen. So he let me pass my physical test, the written testing, get it all out of the way so I could be there on my 21st birthday to start my law enforcement career. And what a gas it's been ever since. I was recruited by the Montana Highway Patrol because someone as young and ambitious as a 21-year-old that has just gotten his teeth sunk into his purpose wanted to be at work. I wanted to do that every day. And I didn't think there was much difference between one and the other until I graduated from the Montana Highway Patrol, went through the academy on minimum wage, and then moved to one of the most expensive communities in the state, West Yellowstone, Montana. 6,600 feet, and it was snowed like 8 feet all winter. They would eventually stop snow blowing the paths to the library, and they would just put 2x4s and plywood over the path and let it snow on top of it in West Yellowstone. It was a long ways from home. I was in a one-man station, but it was a great place to be until I got homesick. And there was no chance of getting back to the county anytime soon. But I had an opportunity while I was there because we had a drug problem in West Yellowstone in school, this small school, the graduating class of less than 12. You wouldn't think that a small town with a population of 1,500 people but has 10,000 people every year, 10,000 people a night for most of the year come to visit would have such an overwhelming drug problem. But we had it, and we had to do something about it. So while I'm getting to enjoy snowmobile patrol and bike patrol and doing other things for the year that I was with them, I did start a school resource officer program, and I went in and I got educated. I went and got certified as a school resource officer so I could teach classes to the kids, so I could build relationships with them, and I could teach them about search and seizure. And then all my partners said, my God, why are you thinking you're going to actually teach the kids about search and seizure? We have a drug problem. You know, it was a funny thing when I found out, when you empower people with knowledge and they feel that they're invested in their own destiny, they begin to make better choices. And that is one of the few things. We had a big scare here, I'm sure you're all familiar with, in Columbia Falls, that shut down all our schools when our kids were threatened. The sheriff's office did great, the police officers did great, and it reminded me how much value there was in the days that I was a school resource officer, when I understood the challenges and the obligations that the schools faced and what they needed to accomplish by the time the day was over. Not just keeping our kids safe, but they had rules they had to follow, just like we have rules we needed to follow. And by bringing a school resource officer back and putting them back in Big Fork, where we have the only high school that's not in an incorporated city, we can create someone that understands what those relationships need to look like so we can be responsive and effective. So when I say I want to bring a school resource officer back, I don't say it because I think it's a good idea. I say it because I know it's a good idea because I've been one. I've seen it work, and I've seen it change a community. And I know we can do it here again. We had one before, and they did great. Eventually, I would have the opportunity to come back to work in Kalispell, in Flathead County, under Jim DuPont and Chuck Curry. I had the chance to pursue my wildest passions and my interests, which you'll see soon, because it was pretty ridiculous what opportunities exist in a small community like this. It's as big as we are, with a small agency with a lot of responsibility. So I had that chance to I promoted as a corporal into search and rescue, where I got to watch our volunteers work in a whole new way. I mean, I loved fire and I loved EMS, and I still do to this day, but I had never had the chance to see what happens when you empower an army of volunteers as big as the search and rescue, where we have a combined numbers at that time of 150 people in our community to organize, coordinate, who all were masters in specific disciplines, whether it was dogs, snowmobiles, jet boats, you name it, they could conquer the world. And I remember we had a few problems while I was the SAR coordinator. One of those that changed my life was a young man. It was a group of 3 young men who were on leave from fighting overseas. They had decided to come to Montana, where they wanted to go out and camp and explore and hike. And they did that on Columbia Mountain. And we got the call late at night that one of them we weren't sure if it was stabbed or cut. It was, by the time the information came down, it was confused, but it ended up being a horrible knife accident where one of the men had slipped and fallen on his calf and had severed his calf, and they couldn't control the bleeding. Alert was dispatched, but if anyone's familiar with Columbia Mountain, you can't land a helicopter on Columbia Mountain. So a small team of NI and one paramedic from Three Rivers Ambulance ran as fast as we could up that mountain, knowing that there's a man bleeding out and they could not control the bleeding, and they were freaking out. And these are good soldiers who had great training, but it was a tough injury. We got to the top. We couldn't get a helicopter out of Maelstrom. Alert couldn't land anywhere close at all. And it was at nighttime. We carried him out for 8 hours on a litter down Columbia Mountain. And as we rotated and we fell and we took turns carrying that litter, I thought, how can there not be a better way? How can this be the way it is? Before that, we'd had plenty of people who died. We didn't know if we could save them. We had some we knew we could have, but we didn't have the resources. We could have eased suffering, but we didn't have the resources. So I went down some wild roads. I joined a committee through DES out of Helena. We passed legislation to get additional funding for search and rescue. We explored almost every possibility. We conducted studies at the state level, and they estimated we just wouldn't get enough use out of a helicopter to even re-equip the state fire helicopters with a hoist to do those rescues. I couldn't let it go, and Chuck will tell you, at one point, I actually was banned from saying the word helicopter in the sheriff's office as the undersheriff. I would get a weekly quota, and the guys would give me things like gyrocopter magazines, and by this point, I had gotten my pilot's license. I had gotten an airplane, and I was a certified mountain search pilot for the state, and was flying search and rescue missions in the county with an airplane, but it still wasn't the goal. I just couldn't figure out how in the world on a deputy's salary I could possibly afford a helicopter. Not that I didn't crunch the numbers infinitely to figure that out. I actually had it calculated down to how many houses I would have to build and sell every 2 years, to the point that I could finally afford a helicopter. When I had a chance through going to a personal development seminar to find out that there are a lot of ways to achieve a dream. So I just decided to build a 30-year business plan, round up some crazy friends who are in the back of the room, because that's where they sit. By the way, one of them is my treasurer, Ron Flink. Thank you for saying yes. It's not a life commitment until I ask you again, by the way. We've been married many times. But a group of us got together and we ate pizza, we came up with wild ideas, and finally it looked enough like it was taking shape that I would take it to a philanthropist to find funding. We just wanted 3 or less people to fund the program so we wouldn't get obsessed with fundraising. And luckily, I was really passionate about that, really passionate. And we closed the deal on the first contact. I only took it to Mike Gogan, and he said yes. It came with some conditions that were mutually beneficial to both of us, that included me working for him, and I learned a ton. But most of all, and the most important part of that I share with you tonight, is that dream, that vision, that night of carrying that poor fellow off the top of that mountain, and all of us falling countless times, is what it took for me to push forward on something that at many times I didn't really even believe was possible if it weren't for the people around me encouraging me and supporting me. So if I can do that, then I know all you can help get me elected. So no pressure. And lastly on that chain, as I step back from that and we look at that program today, 2 amazing pilots, a dozen amazing rear air crew, and they're doing great. They did not need me to continue, for Tube Air to continue as a world-class helicopter search and rescue organization. And when I say something that I mentioned earlier, in order to move forward, you have to leave something behind. Any time that I've ever looked at a position in my life, when I've looked around at the people doing the job and said, I know they can do it as well without me as if I'm here, or not, if not better, then I know it's time for me to move on and grow up myself. Let them carry on. So that's what led me to sheriff with an asterisk by it, which means that it's where I'm headed, not where I am. So while I was at the sheriff's office, I did a lot of things. I'm not going to go through all this. We can have coffee and talk about this list individually as long as you want in the future. I'm going to pick out a couple things off this list. I actually don't have it memorized. I should put it in focus so I can read it, and you can too. A couple things in here. I was drawn very quickly into the field training officer position. It was where I went when you get into law enforcement, you have a year of probation. And when that year of probation is over, you can begin asking for specialty duties. A year after I began working at the sheriff's office, I became a field training officer, I joined the SWAT team, and became a diver. So I was really ambitious from the beginning, but the field training officer position was very important to me, and it's important to me moving forward as well, and I want to share that because, you see, I'd worked for 3 law enforcement organizations already. I had seen organizations that trained and prepared their folks really, really well. And I had also worked for organizations, one small one, that was just developing their program officially. This was a time when the sheriff's office was just developing their true comprehensive field training program. And I wanted to be part of that, and it was a great honor to be part of that. And I was a field training officer for 8 years, and during that time it was one of our most explosive hiring seasons at the sheriff's office, where most of our older guys were retiring, and ladies, and we were getting a whole new crew, as well as an explosion that you might remember in the valley in the early 2000s as people moved here and flooded into our valley, and we were adding deputies every year to increase our ranks. So there was a lot of opportunities to train. But training our next generation, just like I was trained, is something that never stops. It didn't stop when I became a supervisor. It didn't stop when I became the undersheriff.